You know, it's a funny thing how time works. One day, as a little whippersnapper, you're sitting on your father's knee playing Sly Cooper for the first time. The next minute, you're all grown up. You've got new responsibilities, and your interests have changed. But one thing I'll never grow out of is this Thievious Raccoonus. It was 14 years ago since I last played Sly 1, and 14 years ago I wasn't even 14 years old. Now I'm double the age I was when I pulled off my last heist and Sly's first outing. And though time changes, perfection never ages. Even though Sly 1 is not perfect, at least not when compared to the games that would evolve from this very creative platformer Sucker Punch. At the time Sly was made, it's safe to say it was one of a kind. I'm surprised at how well Sly 1 still plays today, 22 years later. In an era where platforming has gone out of style as a genre, I'm excited at how I'm almost enjoying this game more than I did when I was a kid, when my bias for Sly 2 and Sly 3 hung over my experiences with Sly 1, perhaps clouding my appreciation of how ahead of its time the first game was. Sly 1 was made during a transitional period in the history of video games and the history of Sony. For the kids that weren't around back then, this is when AAA games were unique and experimental and not trying to copy each other during each development cycle, mostly because the new ideas had not yet been thought of or tested out. The one trend that was ongoing at the time was the 3D platformer. Sony was making its bones as the premier game publisher by licensing the best third-party content it could find. And 3D platforming was becoming the new standard in game design, with new IPs popping up out of nowhere to take advantage of the newfound possibilities of fully 3D levels. And Sly was made right in the middle of it all. So many games began using 3D platforming that most of them could go for a dime a dozen. But Sly Cooper put a unique twist on both the way platformers were played and the presentation of what a central video game hero could look and sound like.
Freeze, raccoon!
How can I freeze when my heart warms at the very sight of you?
When most video game protagonists were silent, Sly developed a smooth-talking persona to help him navigate the criminal underworld in style. Looking back at late 90s and early 2000s voice acting, it was seemingly an era of improvisation and voice work as video game scripts were small and fully voiced dialogue scenes were rare and impractical. Listening to old voice recordings, you'll notice some very cringy and unintentionally funny line reading, with almost every spoken word in a very theatrical and over-the-top delivery.
Oh, Sly, I see your mouth moving, but all I hear is blah, blah, blah.
Pressure at all times. If you lazy, lowbrow, technically incompetent Afghanistan, steal your jobs right, we'd have some 100 ships by now.
But I see that as a good thing. Actors were going all out and having fun with it, if they were given the opportunity to. Not long after the birth of character action with Dante and Devil May Cry 1, Sly Cooper was one of the first games to have a strong central character with a developed personality, as well as a unique playstyle that set the gameplay apart from the budding 3D platformer genre. Whereas characters like Crash Bandicoot and Jack were dead silent, Sly was witty, flirtatious, and effortlessly suave. He uses his raccoon riz for what it was made for.
1.
Even Sly's supporting cast had unique quirks and humorous dialogue to make them memorable. I love how Bentley is supposed to be the tactician and the emotional support, but he straight up writes off Sly's chances at survival and declares his funeral in advance. The back and forth banter helps to spice up some of the instruction manual dialogue, which is notorious for babying the player in these games. But it was a kid's game, and it honestly never bothered me. At least we got the iconic jump and press the circle button line.
Safely upon diminutive points, leapeth lively and presseth the triggering device with the round geometrical object emblazoned upon it.
So jump and hit the circle button to land on narrow spots.
That's a rough translation.
The tongue-in-cheek delivery is what made games of this era so charming. The villains were obscenely goofy and deliriously sinister. Bad guys would take a pause to address the hero and the players in dramatic monologues, culminating in shouting matches and insult exchanges that would rival anything said in the schoolyard with their ability to offend. And the good guys would take turns roasting each other just as well, because they were all enjoying themselves, just like the people making the game were. The talking parts were kept silly because the people who made them knew that they were making games, but they had the magician's touch of programming knowledge to show that they were indeed creating an art form too. That aside, I'm telling you, these kids' games are more than meets the eye. Sly had a dark story underneath all the glamour of the cel-shaded comic book style. Clockwork is actually one of the most diabolical villains that you would ever see in a story, for kids or adults or otherwise. It's fascinating in his lore that he is able to stay alive for centuries living off of nothing but animosity and jealousy. He's perpetually pissed, a Hall of Fame hater, killing Sly's family and letting him live long enough to be tortured by the memories of what he failed to prevent as a child, all in service of putting our hero through the ultimate test of character. Playing this at an early age, I got a feel for what good storytelling was like, how romantic archetypes play out, and I remember learning a lot of new vocabulary words from playing these games as a kid too. It's sophisticated narrative told through pre-rendered visuals, the way they should be in a game, with an extension of that narrative told through action, as Sly gradually unlocks new techniques that his ancestors had developed and employed so that we could one day get a stealth platformer starring Sly. Once described in a 2005 retrospective as a mix between one-hit kill arcade action and Splinter Cell sneaking, Sly Cooper was innovative in the way it mixed various gameplay techniques together to create a platformer that was as good as any open-world game ever made, and as smart as any stealth game made to that point. In fact, it even predates the first Splinter Cell game by a few months. Although, like many platformers of the era, the combat is simplistic, at least at first glance, with a kill-or-be-killed in one-hit dynamic. Sly 1 has a strong arsenal of upgrades and techniques that put a twist on the moment-to-moment encounters. There's an old-school progression system here that rewards exploration and completion. Each level is short and snappy, with new challenges introduced as you go along that incorporate the new moves that you've learned. Completing the mini collectathon in each level unlocks a special ability to enhance the Thievious prospects. You get slow motion ability, fast motion, invisibility, time freezing, and various acrobatics. There's a lot for Sly to do in such a short time, and the game is even among the first to popularize speedrunning as an optional challenge through the level select and fast travel. All of this is in service of replayability, which is what platformers, among all games, excel at the most. I love the little things about Sly, how the music comes to a halt to match the low frequency of the tiptoe thief walk, the satisfying pop sound of a clue bottle break, the unlimited dopamine received from smacking everything and anything with a cane, the old school art style charm that I would never want to see updated with modern graphics. I mean, I'd love to see what modern Sly would look like with the Ghost of Tsushima engine. But look how goofy the characters look in low polygon mode. Look at how silly Murray looks. He's perfect like this. There's arguably nothing that Sly 1 does wrong or bad, but there's a few things that were done better in the later games, which is why I prefer sequels over remakes. The sequel is where you get to show the theory of evolution and the evolution of theory. Collecting coins in Sly 1 doesn't do much because you get a generous checkpoint system and life upgrades throughout all the levels anyway, and dying never means that much when you can just restart from the midway point. The current release that I'm playing even has rewind mode, which is a cool feature that allows you to erase any small mistakes which have big consequences in a game that lets you die in one hit. You can, of course, convert the coins into charms, which gives you a second chance, and in a way this style fits the fast-paced and fluid nature of what traditional platformers were known for. It's still got a surprising amount of skill required to pull off perfect play. It's a game short enough but selective enough in its choices to warrant replay on and off even 20 years later. It's got levels within levels that you can choose from in any order, and although Sly 2 and Sly 3 would be even more ambitious in the diversity of environments and the scope of the open worlds, Sly 1 is still eclectic in its choices and timeless in its cel-shaded charm. I've always sworn that the Sly series was one of the most highly influential games ever made. From the art style and highly stylized animation cutscenes that would influence, in my opinion, something like Persona 5 later on, to the humorous dialogue that appeals to children and adults, the synthesis of self-contained open worlds with level select replayability with the genres of stealth and platforming, a kung fu panda, and the ability to switch between multiple playable characters in Sly 2 and 3. I'm not sure if a game ever attempted this before, or at least did it as well as Sly did an entire decade before GTA 5 tried doing it on a grand scale. And even early reception of that idea at the time was skeptical at best. The first game set a lot of trends in motion in an era both before new trends would take hold and stifle creativity, and after a new dimension was opened up with full 3D rendered physics. It's a game that truly deserved its sequels, and what an ominous way to set one up. I think that Sly 1 is a good game still, if not a great one, even though I reserve the highest of praise for the sequel, which I consider to be a personal favorite and a masterpiece of the genre. But perhaps ranking and making a list is only good for personal favorites and propaganda, to help point people in the direction of the unseen and underrated. Forget about a 10-second head start. Sly Cooper had a 20-year head start in gaming excellence. Sucker Punch started as a close-knit group of programmers who were dissatisfied with the way Microsoft was doing things. Some things never change. Back in 1997, when I was born. I first became aware of Sly Cooper from seeing a TV commercial, I think, back when product commercials were crazy and games were so beloved that they would have fun with live action to get people interested. The first time I saw Sly, I must have known it would be great, and I started with Sly 2, a game I hope to get footage of someday for a retrospective. I eventually got around to Sly 1, and have been playing it on and off ever since. My life history and Sly Cooper's history are very much intertwined, and one could say that I've taken more than a few pages out of the Thievious Raccoonus to make my own life story.
The time had come for me to chronicle my own adventures into the great book. This is gonna be fun.